I mean, it's not quite New York, but it'll do. So I've got a bit of a pet hate, and it involves like supporters speaking like you can sign any player for any position at any time. And I suppose technically you can, right? But say, for example, right now, Liverpool need a right winger, especially. Obviously, Mo Salah's left, and maybe he's being replaced output-wise by Isaac, by Wirtz, definitely possible. But in terms of like the position, Liverpool don't have a right winger at the moment, right? And supporters will just kind of constantly reference that need and just say like, Liverpool need a right winger. Why haven't they bought a right winger? Just over and over again, sort of thing. Almost like, you know, you live in a home and you need a pint of milk. You know, you can just go down the supermarket and buy a pint of milk. Obviously, you can do that. But when it comes to football and building a squad, it's a bit more complicated. Any player that you sign, you've pretty much got to keep for 5 years, really. I mean, obviously, you don't want to have to sell them immediately after. You want them to do well. So any player that you sign, you have to be convinced by. You have to be absolutely convinced by the pint of milk that you're buying, basically. So obviously, Liverpool seem to be finding it quite difficult at the moment, or they seem to be hesitating when it comes to buying a right winger. Season starts in like 2 weeks, and technically at the moment, anyone who plays on the right wing is probably going to be a left winger, just playing out of position. And I think one of the reasons supporters speak like this is because they don't tend to actually look. They don't tend to actually have an awareness of who's available in the specific area of the pitch. So you just say, you know, we need the right winger, but there's no thought put into who, sort of thing. But it's actually really easy in the modern day to just find out who is available, who Liverpool can buy, and just kind of run through them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the right wing market, like the top 30 players listed according to market value. And I'm just realistically going to apply each of their cases to Liverpool. And we'll just get a gauge on the market and hopefully showcase why. So far, Liverpool haven't signed the right winger and instead seems to be signing the left winger. So these are the top 10 players for the right wing based on market value. Right, so you've got Yamal, Elise, Doué, Saka, Diamande, Semenyo, Estevao, Mbaye, Neto, and Rayan. Right, they're the top 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to help these out immediately. And let's do that. I mean, they're players that we've just got absolutely no chance of landing because they play for, you know, Manchester United or Man City or Arsenal or just players that are just completely unrealistic for Liverpool to go for. Diamande would have been a little green light, and obviously he was at the start of the summer. Liverpool go for him, and rightly so. But obviously he's just signed for Real Madrid, so he is now a no. So he's now a red flag. Let's move on to Neto. I mean, Pedro Neto is a player that I have strong thoughts on. I suppose we can come to that at the end of the video. But I suppose, you know, he does seem to be available. So we'll put a green light on that one for now. Rayan, we'll go amber with Rayan, because obviously he's a player that a lot of us would take. I would personally take him, but he signed for Bournemouth 6 months ago. From next year onwards, apparently he's got a release clause of like 130 million upwards. So they just don't need to sell at the moment, and if they did sell, I'm assuming it'd be for around that price, which is just a joke. So straight away there you can see, out of the top 10 most valuable players for that side of the pitch, Liverpool could only really be in the conversation for 2 of them. And there's context in there as to why neither really are that applicable to the void that Liverpool have got. So let's move on to the next little group. Madueke, Kudus, Minte, Diallo, Shehi, Gula, Rafinha, Savinho, Rodrigo, and Greenwood. So once again, I'm just going to help you out really quickly. And we're going to get rid of Madueke, Ahmad, Shehi, and Greenwood for obvious reasons. I'm sure I don't even need to explain. So let's move on to Kudus. I mean, Kudus is a player that I've always been a little bit on the fence about. I don't mind him, but I think he's now 26. I think he's got like another 5 years or so on his contract at Spurs. It's just a non-starter as far as I'm concerned. Mbaye is a player that I would do. 21 years old, really fast. You know, I reckon he suits Iriola's game quite well. He's got that transition style about him. Gets to the byline quite often and all that. So we'll give Minter a green light. Arda Güler, I would think about. I would potentially do that one. But again, it's whether it's realistic or not. And he's at Real Madrid. I just personally can't see it. I think he's young enough to still be viewed as a real gem. So I don't think that one's a goer. Rafinha, again, loved him a few years ago. Left-footed and all that sort of thing. Really, really intense. But I think he turns 30 in the next few weeks. And he's on over 300 grand a week at Barcelona. So are Liverpool going to invest in a 30-year-old with a wage like that post-peak? Probably not. So Rafinha, little red flag. Savinho was an interesting one. Savinho was a player that I think if he played for anyone other than Man City, I would be pushing him a lot more. And I know that his output in England over the past season, I think it's like 2 goals or something. But he's really young. He's a player that I would be willing to have a conversation about. But he plays for Man City. I just really can't see that one happening. But we'll give an amber, just to keep him in the conversation, I suppose. Rodrigo, again, I think Rodrigo would be in this conversation, but he's injured at the moment. Are Liverpool going to invest in a player who's injured? Highly unlikely. So, Rodrigo, red flag. So it's not looking good so far. We have Neto and Minter as the only 2 players with green flags, and we have Savinho and Ryan. But everyone else basically on that side of the pitch to replace Mo Salah in a positional sense is basically a non-starter. So let's move on to the next 10. So we've got Mbaye, Adeyemi, Alanga, Akliouche, Carl, Ouattara, Conceição, Simeone, Kubo, and Mazantuono. And again, sticking with the theme, I'll help you out really quickly. So we're not going to sign Mbaye from Everton. That's not happening. Adeyemi has just joined Barcelona, so that one's not happening. Akliouche I would have done, but he's just joined PSG, so that one's not happening. Carl, you know, he's a bit of a wonder kid at Bayern Munich at the moment. There's no way to letting him go. What I will say at this point is, if between now and the end we see a few more green flags, the crucial thing to consider now is whether these players are good enough for Liverpool. Again, Liverpool, Premier League winners, Champions League winners, that's what Liverpool should be aiming for every single season. And the player that we're looking at here kind of has to be a starter. Are any of these good enough to start for Liverpool? Are any of these good enough to start for a title-winning team? You know, that's the question I want you to ask yourself. So Alanga, for me, is a no. To be fair, he only signed for Newcastle 12 months ago. Ouattara I've been weighing up for a bit, but I think he's probably attainable. But he only moved to Brentford 12 months ago. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that he's good enough for Liverpool. Francisco Conceição, I'm going to touch on again in a sec, but he's probably a green. He's probably a genuine option just because he's 23. He's playing for Juventus. He's not on a daft wage. So, you know, we can probably have a conversation about him. I think Giuliano Simeone is playing for his dad in Madrid. I can't see that one happen for that reason, really, to be honest. Takefusa Kubo has been on my radar for a few seasons. We can probably give him a green light, considering he plays for Sociedad still. Been there for a fair while now. Probably is attainable. And Franco Mazantuono is still a kid. Hasn't quite cut it at Real Madrid yet. And I'm pretty sure he's just gone on loan to Fiorentina. So, you know, that's the top 30 players, right, according to market value for the right wing in the world, right? So that's not to say they're the best right wingers on the planet. There'll obviously be some players in there that haven't quite emerged yet as a gem. Maybe Liverpool should target those guys, whatever. But the purpose of doing this is just to show that, like, we can see what the options are. We can see who Liverpool will be considering, and you know how many of the players that I've listed there are you A, completely sold on, and B, you know, they could actually be signed this summer for a reasonable fee, reasonable wage, you know, all that sort of thing. So out of the 30 that we've just looked at, we're basically left with these guys: Pedro Neto, Ryan, Yankuba Minte, Savinio, Francisco Conceição, and Takefusa Kubo. Any of them good enough to start for Liverpool? You know, I think there's a genuine question mark there. I think out of all of them, Ryan has probably got the highest ceiling. But he's going to cost an awful lot. Only arrived in England 6 months ago. So what we're going to do at this point, I'm just going to have a little look deeper into some of these options. So we'll start with Pedro Neto. So what you can see there is his output. And when it comes to looking at radars, it's not necessarily the more surface area that you cover, the better player you are. It just kind of means the more that you're doing, really. But if he's not covering the entire radar, what you want at least is for him to pop in certain areas. You know, is he a big dribbler? Is he a big shots guy? Whatever. But you can kind of see there really with Pedro Neto, it's just kind of a much of a muchness really. Obviously we know he's really fast when it comes to the eye test. He's probably more of a provider than a scorer himself. Generally speaking, I don't think his availability is very good, but in the season just gone, he plays about 32 90s in the Premier League, which is good. So I think the thing with Pedro Neto is I think he could come in and immediately just do a job to a steady level. But the problem is you just know what he is. This is what Pedro Neto is, what you see in there. That's his level. He's probably not going to get much better. Relatively safe pair of hands, maybe. Left-footed, fast, okay, good in transition. There's an element of suitability in there, but it's just a bit of a low ceiling, really. It's just, you know, you're not exactly reaching for the stars. So let's have a little look at Ryan. So one surprising thing with Ryan is, you know, people are talking like he's the second coming of Salah. But in the numbers at least, I know he's only playing for Bournemouth, that has to be factored in. But in the numbers, he's not really popping yet. He looks really ordinary for the most part. Relatively creative, you know, he's in the 80th percentile of players, 80th percentile of attacking midfielders and wingers for XG assisted, which is not bad. We know he's really athletic looking at the tape. You know, I think he's over 6 foot, he's pretty fast and all that. He can definitely mix it in the Premier League. I think you'd be buying Ryan because of what he could become. But the problem is, looking at that, you know, to spend so much on him now, I think that would just have to be a lot more impressive. He'd have to have a lot more output to his game at the age of 19 than what he actually has got. I think at this point what I'll do is just get up Yandy Amande's radar just to show you what, you know, a 19-year-old worth 100 million is supposed to look like. Just like you've got something to go on. But you can see with Diamande there, like his output across the board really was pretty outstanding for a teenager. To such an extent that you can justify then, with evidence, paying a lot of money for him. Anyway, let's move on to the next guy, Yankuba Minte. So, again, you'd expect maybe, you know, the radar to pop in a few more areas, but we can see he's a grafter. You know, he works really hard. His pressure regains are really high. Not too much of a surprise. You can see he's relatively creative there. His XG assisted is leaping off the page a little bit. Decent number of touches in the box. Again, we know he's really, really fast. He's only 21. Decent availability as well. He plays about 30 90s in the Premier League last season. He's still really raw. I think Liverpool. I think it would be sensible if Liverpool just kind of gave him another few seasons at Brighton or whatever to see how he develops in that. But you're in the position of need now. You need a right-sided player now. Minte is left-footed, as I've said. So depending on the price, because I'm assuming he's not on the highest wage at the Amex, I think depending on the price, that's a deal I probably would have explored. But Liverpool don't seem to be going there. But so that's Yankuba Minte. Takefusa Kubo pops in different ways. Obviously, again, similar to Minte, really intense pressure. Wins a lot of fouls, so he's obviously very tricky, very good with the ball at his feet. Decent crosser of the ball as well, relatively creative, similar to Minter. But when it comes to actually finishing the move, look at his XG, look at his shots, virtually non-existent. Some of that could be due to Real Sociedad. I know, generally speaking, they're quite a defensive team in years gone by. But Kubo's really technical. He's only 24. He works really hard. I think he's quite a functional kind of player. Be good in the system. He'd do exactly what you ask of him and things like that. But the output's just never been there with Kubo. He's just never really posted enough goals and assists. I know it's quite simplistic, but he's just never really posted enough in that department to justify like a spot in the final third for a team as big as Liverpool. So not too bad, but yeah, you worry about the end product a little bit with Kubo. I think he'd need more. Let's have a look at Conceição. So this guy surprised me a little bit. I didn't expect his radar to look like this, but it is, it's pretty impressive in terms of service area. Again, another keen pressure, working hard for the team, but he also retains possession quite well compared to your typical attacking midfielder / winger. Lots of touches in the box and lots of shots as well. Up at 3.1 shots per 90, which is, it's quite impressive. That, to be fair, he's only 23 years old. Appeared 31 times in Serie A for Juventus last season. He is really short. I think he's about 5'6", 5'7". Not a physical presence at all. Got really quick feet, but I don't think he's quite threatening and behind fast. But nevertheless, given his age, given his output there, he's a player that I'm not willing to rule out. And I think we'll wrap up with this lad. This is Ibrahim Mbaye, who obviously didn't make the list, didn't make the top 30 because of market value. Obviously, he's relatively cheap compared to a lot of his peers because he's only 18 years old and he's barely played for PSG. But his output is good. Obviously he's benefiting from playing for PSG. He's probably playing in games where PSG are the dominant team. Maybe PSG have already got the game won, things like that. But, he retains the ball with his passing, which is always a bit of a standout quality when it comes to attacking players, given attacking players just aren't typically like that. Works really hard with the pressures. Decent when it comes to XG assisted. Some of the XG in the shots is there a little bit. But you've got a lot to work on there, considering he's 18 years old. And if you watch him on the tape, he is really quick. He's really dynamic. Would suit a transition game. Would suit Areola. You could probably get him for less than he's actually worth, considering he's not getting minutes at PSG and things like that, and they're signing every attacker under the sun by the looks of it. So this seems to be the direction that Liverpool are opting to take. So you look at a lot of the proven options in the market. I've just run through 30 of them, and I think Liverpool have looked at them and largely thought they're either not good enough or we can't get them. So what do you do in a situation like that? Do you go and sign Pedro Neto, who has already hit his ceiling and it's not a particularly high one? Or do you roll the dice on someone like Mbaye? This seems to be where Liverpool are going with it. And looking at the market that we've just run through, I'm really not surprised that Liverpool would do something like this. It's a bit of a gamble, obviously. I would like the player to be a lot more proven, given we're playing for Liverpool. We're winning Premier Leagues, we're winning Champions Leagues. You have to be of a certain level immediately, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not sure Mbaye is quite that. But again, going back to the market, what choice do you have? That's where we are. See where we go with it between now and the end of the window. But yeah, subscribe.